Jehovah's Witnesses have been accused of failing the victims of child sex abuse after a case in Manchester where a man who was convicted of sexual assault was allowed to cross-examine his victims.
Jonathan Rose spent years as a senior member. In 2013, he was imprisoned for 9 months after being convicted of the historical sexual abuse of young girls. Jehovah's Witnesses went to expel him, but Rose appealed, which led to an extraordinary gathering. A meeting was called between 8 male elders, a convicted paedophile and his female victims. Over the course of an evening, the women had to recount what had happened to them, while he, Jonathan Rose, got to interrogate them.
What I'm saying to you is this didn't happen. Give me one reason please why I would have done it to you. I had no reason to touch you, we were friends.
At one point, another man in the room asked the woman if she'd egged Rose on.
This is a $66 million class action lawsuit that's been filed against a religious organization best known for its door-to-door proselytizing. The Jehovah's Witnesses accused of having rules and policies that protect child sex abusers and put children in harm's way. This $66 million class action lawsuit has now been filed on behalf of alleged child sex abuse victims across the country. The organization's policy and protocol for dealing with allegations of sexual abuse is seriously flawed and results in further harm to victims of sexual abuse and results in legitimate allegations of sexual abuse going unreported. Specifically named in the suit is what's called the two-witness rule.
They're expected to produce 2 credible eyewitnesses to their assault or to their abuse. And by credible eyewitness, I mean the eyewitnesses not only have to be other Jehovah's Witnesses that saw it occur, but have to be Jehovah's Witnesses in good standing in the church. So this obviously never happened.
For decades, the organization has received thousands of reports of sexual abuse, including child sex abuse, and has failed to investigate and or report the abuse to secular authorities, even where required by law.
By now, the story might sound familiar. The church and its national elders today hit with twin lawsuits.
He waited for the room to clear out, and that's when the abuse started.
Miranda Lewis of Chester says she was only 4 when a man named Norton True, a ministerial servant at her Jehovah's Witness church in Bellows Falls, started to molest her. Says he'd been molesting her sister, Anessa, too. And when their mom found out and confronted church elders...
My children were not protected, and they were not supported, and they were pretty much discarded after the abuse occurred.
It's an investigation into child sexual abuse among Jehovah's Witnesses and accusations that religious leaders led a cover-up within some of the group's 14,000 U.S. congregations.
In this San Francisco courtroom, the first child abuse case against the Jehovah's Witnesses to go to trial is underway.
The next matter on the calendar.
Candace Conti is suing the organization for failing to protect her from a known child abuser when she was 9 years old.
If I were to sum up our goals in this case, it was to attack the policies and procedures that were in place that let a serial molester continue to molest children.
The case hinges on letters from Jehovah's Witness leaders to the heads of local congregations. For almost 20 years, they've ordered them to send reports, like this one, for every known child abuser, to hide these cases from their congregations, and not to cooperate with law enforcement or the courts unless instructed to. They've refused judges' orders to turn over these abuse reports, so no one knows how many cases like Conti's are out there.
Jehovah's Witnesses abhor child abuse of any form.
The Jehovah's Witnesses insist that they comply with the law, and their lawyers argue that the First Amendment gives them the right to set child abuse policies as they see fit.
Religious beliefs and standards of Jehovah's Witnesses were at play in this case from start to finish.
Candace Conti was part of a Jehovah's Witness congregation in Fremont, California. She was often grouped with adults to go knocking on doors, including this man, Jonathan Kendrick.
He was very dominating, very domineering, he commanded a presence.
She says Kendrick would take advantage of their time door knocking to find ways to be alone with her.
Jonathan Kendrick molested me as a child. I really kind of pushed everything down and tried not to think about it as much as I could.
What no one in Conti's family knew was that Jonathan Kendrick had admitted to molesting another child a year earlier.
Regarding possible sexual abuse.
Michael Clark, an elder in the congregation, was asked about it in this deposition.
Do you recall becoming aware of a report of sexual abuse of a child by Jonathan Kendrick?
Yes.
When did you first become aware of such a report?
He had called us to his home to discuss or to confess to an incident with his stepdaughter.
Clark never called the police. He followed Watchtower protocol. He wrote to New York headquarters asking how to deal with Kendrick's confession. They told him not to investigate the matter further. Instead, they said, provide him with strong scriptural counsel to avoid a repetition of such a serious offense.
We don't make that public to the congregation. That's confidential.
The elders did not warn other members that one of their own was a child abuser.
And that's the policy and the practice of Jehovah's Witnesses that you learned as an elder, correct?
Yes.
Clark says the elders told Kendrick not to be alone with children, but he was still allowed to join in congregation activities that included minors. A year later, one of those minors was Candace Conti, and in one of the dozen lawsuits I've been following, Watchtower supervisor Richard Ashe was asked if the organization has a responsibility to protect children from abuse.
But within the congregation, ours is a spiritual protection. When we're talking about physical protection, that's up to the secular authorities to provide. And so
he was asked about the Watchtower's Bible-based directives to keep child abuse cases confidential.
It states in paragraph 3, there is a time to keep quiet when your words should prove to be few. Do you see that?
Yes,
sir. You know, Mr. Jones,
object to that. It's a violation of the First Amendment, freedom of religion, freedom of association.
Molest is not the right word. We were sexually assaulted. We were sexually raped.
John Michael Ewing will never forget the day this picture was taken. Ewing says he met his abuser when he was baptized as a Jehovah's Witness. Ewing was 14. Michael Rust was a ministerial servant.
I was homeschooled. I didn't go to public school. I think that made me much more gullible and much more trusting.
Heather Steele tells Pix 11 her trust was broken by a Jehovah's Witness elder who sexually assaulted her for years, Donald Nicholson.
I was definitely groomed because it started when I was a baby, and I never literally knew anything else.
Steele and Ewing met for the first time today, decades after their alleged abuse. They plan to file lawsuits Wednesday in Kings County Supreme Court, naming 8 members of the governing body of the Jehovah's Witnesses. They claim the faith has a long history of protecting child predators. Erwin Zalkin is their attorney.
Because this organization has allowed the sexual abuse of children to fester within its ranks for decades.
While they grew up hundreds of miles apart, with Ewing from Florida and Steele from New York, there were many similarities in their stories. Both say their abusers quoted scripture to justify their actions. And after coming forward to faith leadership, the men they called out were reassigned and allowed to work with other children.
This goes all the way up the chain to the top, and that's why we're suing the top.
In February, Governor Andrew Cuomo signed the Child Victims Act. Under the new law, a unique one-year window opens this week for adult survivors to sue the people and institutions involved in their child sex abuse, no matter how long ago it took place. Over 1,000 victims are expected to come forward, including Ewing and Steele. The Jehovah's Witnesses did not want to comment on their cases, but told Pix 11 in a statement, Watchtower's stand on the subject of child abuse is very clear. We abhor child abuse in any form.
That's my hope, is that we're able to start cleansing this sickness out, because it's what it is. It's a sickness, and it needs to be cleansed.
The attorneys in this case tell us they have credible information that Jehovah's Witnesses have maintained a list of known sex abusers within their community. Their lawyers are now...
6 people have filed a civil lawsuit saying when they were children, they were sexually abused by church elders within local Jehovah's Witness Kingdom halls.
What we see repeatedly is that when one person has the courage to speak out and word of that spreads within the community, then others have the courage to.
The suit claims a church elder at the time, Reginald Tyrone Jackson, committed many of the crimes. A public records search reveals Jackson has served time in prison within the last 10 years for indecency with a child, sexual contact, and is a registered sex offender. The 6 unidentified plaintiffs are now young adults. Each says the abuse spanned years during their childhoods when they were 13 or younger. We visited the address in the lawsuit listed as the place where Jackson lived and could be served.
That is this address, right?
Yes.
And you're Reginald Tyrone Jackson?
Uh-huh.
But you don't think this is not you?
No, that must be a mistake. That must be for something else.